Today's podcast is brought to you by Visa. Whether you're a super fan or a food truck owner, Visa wants to help you pursue your passion by providing you with the most secure and easy payment experience possible. That's why they're continuing to make innovations, from tapping to pay to push payments, so you can get to where you would like to be. Visa, everywhere you want to be.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolfe. This is Nick Wright. Chris Canty's here. We got a great show for you today as Fox salutes all of our veterans and active members of the military, some of whom kind enough, nice enough to join us here in studio with us this morning. Thank you
guys for coming. This is great. We got a legitimate studio audience, and it's a very accomplished studio audience. We don't typically have an audience around here except for on television. It's great to have you guys in. Thank you guys so much.
Now we can get actual audience
reaction
to whatever Nick has to say.
Booze, cat calls.
You're absolutely right, Jenna, because sometimes Nick come up here and he's talking crazy.
That is true.
So we got to just make sure that we have an audience to help keep him in line.
And I see the little fan in the Giants gear. When we talk Giants, you're probably going to boo me, pal. Like, it's just going to happen.
All right, well, here we go. We got a lot to get to today. We're going to jump right in with a little Thursday night football. Boy, it was a good one last night. Oakland Raiders hosting the Los Angeles Chargers, and we are going to pick this one up in the fourth. Just over 4 minutes left. Phillip Rivers hits Austin Eckler for a 6-yard touchdown to give the Chargers the lead. Rare highlight for Rivers, who had a tough game with 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Raiders rookie Josh Jacobs, he's been so good this season, capping off a 10-play drive with his 7th touchdown of the year. Raiders up 2, but the Chargers would have one last chance to connect with Keenan Allen on a 4th down. That was picked up by Carl Joseph. How about a big win for the Raiders? They improved to 5-4 on the season. Here's John Gruden, who celebrated with Raider Nation after the game.
Every win, I'm going down there. I got face paint all over me. I got to see some costumes I have not seen before at any football games. Awesome.
So we don't often see that jubilation from John Gruden. That was jubilation. So we talked a lot about the Raiders before the season. They were previewed in Hard Knocks. Yep. We didn't think that much of them just because of who they had, how many games they won last year. Did we underestimate Gruden and the Raiders as a legit playoff team, Nick?
I certainly did. I have to give them credit. They have had a brutal slate, as the entire AFC West has, drawing the NFC North as your cross-conference division. The AFC South, which, while it might not have a great team, doesn't have a terrible team that you can just walk over. The Raiders also had the impossible task of, hey, you're going to play at home in week 2, and then you're not going to play at home again until week 9, which is the situation they had because they're moving stadiums. And I think the NFL didn't want them to have any more games with the baseball diamond on the field, so they sent them on a road trip. They sent them over to London, and they're now finally getting back home. And through that brutal schedule, through that impossible road trip, through the Antonio Brown mess, they're 5-4. And as you said before the show, Canty, they find themselves in the absolute thick of the AFC wildcard hunt. And by the way, I think the 5-4 is fitting to become 7-4 because they have Cincinnati and the Jets coming up as their next 2 games. Cincinnati, they'll of course have a little extra time to prepare, having played on a Thursday. So I have to give the Raiders credit. Gruden has been a punchline on this show. The Raiders have been an afterthought on this show. They are far better than I expected them to be coming into the year, and they have put themselves in position to do exactly what they wanted to do when Gruden got there, which is have legitimate optimism by the time they move to Vegas. I think they are well on their way to accomplishing that goal.
No, they are, and I got to stand on that corner with you because I didn't believe in the Raiders coming into this season either. And Jenna, I think the big issue is when you get rid of generational talents like Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper, it's hard to envision your football team after a talent drain becoming more competitive. But that's exactly what the Raiders have been in every single game this season. I mean, save the week 2 matchup that they had at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's the only game where I looked at and said, maybe not so much because Pat Mahomes threw 4 touchdown passes in the second quarter. But if you look at the 4 losses that this Raiders team has, the Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers,
Legit
the Minnesota Vikings, and the Houston Texans. All teams going into Week 10 that have 6 wins or better. So you're talking about playing against the cream of the NFL, and this team is hanging in there and competing against that group. But the fact that they've been so competitive, the fact that it's a relatively young group, I think people have to be optimistic about where the arrow is pointed for this Oakland Raiders team.
And since that 1-2 start, those 2 losses, Green Bay and Houston, people got to keep in mind the context. The Green Bay loss, they are about to take the lead headed into halftime. Derek Carr fumbles reaching for the pylon. Green Bay takes it down and scores, gets the next kickoff, scores. All of a sudden, that game gets away from them in a game where they had played really well in the first half, and they had the Texans beat.
Yep.
That's a brutal loss because they played well enough to win. That's the game Deshaun Watson gets kicked in the face, right? Fixes his face mask, throws the game-winning touchdown. But since that 1-2 start, their 2 losses are to one excellent team in Green Bay, one game where they played well enough to win against a good team in Houston, and otherwise a game like last night, they had plenty of opportunities not to win it last night, up to and including the final drive after Carlson misses the extra point, and they hung on to put themselves in this position.
It's not just about what you mentioned, losing Amari Cooper and Khalil Mack. It's getting guys like Rich Incognito. It's what happened with Antonio Brown. It's distractions. It was the cameras in training camp. Vontaze perfect with what happened there. But then you look at this team and you say, well, what's the theme? And it's been resilience. It was last week's win against Detroit. It was last night's win over the Chargers. It's like every time they're down or trailing in a game, they somehow find a way to come back in and win. Realistically, how far can this team go?
Well, I think this can be a wild card team. I mean, you look at the AFC landscape, I think we have to pencil in Buffalo as one of the wild card winners based on what they've done to this point and what their upcoming schedule is. But, I mean, the Raiders are right there with the Colts. I mean, the Raiders only play one team with a winning record in their final 7 games. So they have a real opportunity here. And keep in mind, they hold the head-to-head tiebreaker with the Colts because they beat them earlier this season in Indy. But in looking at this Raiders team, yeah, I absolutely believe that they can be a wild card team. And that's in part based on the play that we've seen from Derek Carr. I mean, in 8 of the 9 games that they've played this season, he's had a 95 passer rating or better. He's not making mistakes. I think he understands who he is as a quarterback, but more so he understands who he's not as a quarterback. And all you have to do is point to the last game-winning drives that he had, 2 in the last 5 days, the one against the Detroit Lions, and then the one he had last night where he was a combined 8 for 11 for 116 yards, a touchdown, and a 136 passer rating. When your quarterback is playing like that in the critical moments of a game, you're always going to have a chance. You're always going to be competitive. And based on the opponents that they have on their upcoming schedule, you have to feel good about their position to try to take a stranglehold on that second wild card.
2 points, one on Carr. Well, I think for Carr, it's not just that he's played the best football we've seen him play since the year where he broke his leg at the tail end of the season, where he was probably going to finish somewhere in the top 4 or 5 of the MVP discussion had he not suffered the injury. But I also think Derek Carr was playing for his future as an Oakland Raider this year. They can get out of this contract after this season. John Gruden was very, very high on Carr when he got to Oakland. Seemed less high on Carr after spending a year with him. I think one of the reasons they made the trades they made was to accumulate draft capital in case they needed to go get a quarterback. Derek Carr solidified himself that he's going to be the quarterback of this team when they go to Vegas next season. But the other thing both of you mentioned is the trades, most notably the Khalil Mack trade. And this is where, and this is a self-inflicted wound, John Gruden let the narrative get away from him immediately. He should have instantly said, listen, obviously, we are in the short term going to be worse because we traded a great player for players that are not yet on the team. You guys say what you want about the trade. I think it's fair to ask you not to evaluate it until we get our return. Had he said that, right now he could be saying, have you checked on the Khalil Mack trade lately? Because the first pick we got from that is Josh Jacobs, who's on pace for 1,400 yards and might win Offensive Rookie of the Year. The next pick all of a sudden looks like a top 10 pick from the Chicago Bears. Something people weren't saying last year. It was like, oh man.
Even this year.
Going into this season. And so the narrative got away from them on that. You're always going to be worse in the short term when you trade a player for picks. That should have been the messaging from the Raiders. Had it been, I think maybe his first year, the narrative of his first year would have been a little bit different. Instead, every week we saw Khalil Mack get a strip sack. We saw the Raiders not be able to sack the quarterback, and we called John Gruden a doofus. this. And so right now, this team has to be one of the surprises in football.
TV doesn't work out for you. PR, Nick. You're really good at what people could have, should have, would have said.
That's what he should have said, man.
Talk some NBA. Last night, Kawhi Leonard actually played basketball, Nick.
Yep.
That
Happy
after
for
he
him.
missed Wednesday's game against the Bucks because of
Load management.
After the game, Kawhi said he was, quote, shocked that the NBA revealed the nature of his injury. The NBA also fined the Clippers $50,000 for Doc Rivers' comments that were inconsistent with Kawhi Leonard's health. Nick, I ask you, what's your reaction to the latest here with Kawhi?
Kawhi was great last night, particularly in the fourth quarter. More on that in a moment, but you used a very important word there. Inconsistent. And that is what I would call the Clippers, Doc Rivers, and even Kawhi Leonard on this very specific issue. Doc Rivers said Kawhi is totally healthy and said he feels great, and the reason he feels great is because of what we've been doing. Kawhi Leonard, coming into the year, said feels so much better than he did at this point last season when he was coming off the injury controversy with the Spurs, and said load management would be different this year. That has not been the case. Their messaging has been one thing, their actions have been another. Kawhi Leonard is not only not playing in back-to-backs, and they're saying he can't play in back-to-backs. NBA saying it's because of a patella tendon issue in his knee. That's what Kawhi was, I think, most upset about, is that the NBA was revealing his private medical information. But they're not even using Kawhi Leonard in the games that he plays in a way I've ever seen a superstar use.
How do you mean?
Well, his minutes through three quarters every game are... yesterday he played 4 minutes in the third quarter. Yesterday he played going into the fourth quarter of the game. He had played 21 minutes of his team's 36. That is not a typical rotation minutes for the superstar on your team, especially a superstar in year 9, at 28 years old. But what it is resulting in is in every game, Kawhi Leonard is the freshest player on the court in the fourth quarter. He's averaging 13.5 points per game in the fourth quarter.
18 last night.
He was great last night. He's had at least 15 fourth quarter points in 3 straight games. Because of the way they're using him, it is got to be frustrating as a Clippers fan wondering, is it true he couldn't do this if he had played the night before? No one will know. I just know this. We've never seen a guy his age, his level of stature in the league be on this type of system. Maybe it will work out for them, but it's unprecedented for a player who, unlike Kawhi Leonard last year, he's not coming off a major injury where we knew going into the year he was going to be on a minutes or a games restriction.
Yeah, he's not coming off a major injury, but we saw them have an adjustment to how they managed what he dealt with 2 years ago in Toronto, and they had success with that formula. So I think that the Clippers and Doc Rivers wanted to adopt that. What I find strange about the situation is that Kawhi is so vocal about not having the health concerns that the organization and that the medical staff and the head coach do. When Kawhi comes out and says, no, I'm healthy, this is the best I've ever felt, while the organization is saying we're managing a condition that he's dealing with within his knee, to me, that inconsistency is something that you try to avoid. Most functional organizations don't have those types of things pop up. And then when the NBA is chiming in on it and saying, yeah, we've been in consultation with the Clippers medical staff, from the NBA's perspective, they're trying to protect their relationship with their business partners, which is a television company. Yep. So you can understand why they would want the narrative out there about Kawhi managing a significant injury. But I don't understand from Kawhi's standpoint what there is to be gained by coming out and contradicting your head coach and the organization. This is an organization that you decided to come to in free agency. You're the one that forced them to trade Danilo Gallinari and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a boatload of picks to the Oklahoma City Thunder to get you a running mate in Paul George. This is the situation that you asked for. And so early in the season, when they're trying to do you a solid because you don't want to play in more than 60 to 65 games in the regular season, why would you come out and put them in a tough spot with the league office and put the league in a tough spot with their television partners?
Well, and one other note because I understand there's going to be a lot of folks who use last night as vindication of the plan, which is, look, didn't play the night before. He's sensational in the fourth quarter. They're down 6 going into the fourth quarter. They end up winning by 6, and all that is fair to a degree. But Kawhi Leonard is going to, I believe by some, start to assume the mantle of, well, this is obviously the most clutch player in the league. Look at what he's doing in the fourth. There's an element of that is going, if this is the plan, that is going to be fairly graded on a curve. Like every year, Steph Curry is not the highest three-point percentage in basketball, but we all know he's the best three-point shooter in basketball. Sometimes Joe Harris or Joe Ingles, somebody will lead the league in three-point percentage, but we say, well, none of those are pull-up threes. They're shooting when they're open. And Steph, he's shooting in the flow of the offense, not in the flow of the offense. He's shooting in tough situations, non-tough situations. So we understand, even if his numbers don't say it, he's the best shooter in the league. Well, if you've got only one superstar in basketball that gets to be the freshest player when he does play, only one superstar in basketball that is going to play less minutes than anyone else the first three quarters, that has to be baked into the math of what he does in the fourth quarter. And so right now for the Clippers, it is working. They are 5-1 with him. It's working when he's playing. I'm very curious to watch how this evolves throughout the season, and I'm curious to watch how their seeding is affected by the 20-some games he might plan to miss this year, and if that's going to be a little different than how it affected the Raptors last year out east.
What will also be interesting is how much pressure the organization puts on him if the NBA comes down on them and saying, listen, this has got to stop in terms of how you're trying to manage Kawhi Leonard in the games that he's playing. I think that's something that's going to be a strained dynamic throughout the course of the year.
I had no idea you had such an issue with load management. I mean, when I met you, I didn't know. Like,
well, I got this weird
theory.
He's
passionate about it.
I've got this weird theory about pro athletes in the prime of their career. They should play. It's one of my more controversial things.
On to Patrick Mahomes now. The will he or won't he play, speaking of playing conversation, getting louder as the Chiefs prepare for the Titans. He actually wants to play. Mahomes was again a full participant in practice yesterday, is expected to take the field for the first time in 24 days on Sunday, although nothing official has been announced. Nick, you expect MVP-level Mahomes if he does indeed take the field?
Chris Caney, have we ever seen Patrick Mahomes play in the NFL and not look like MVP-level Patrick Mahomes? No. So, yeah, that's exactly what I expect. By the way, good news on the Chiefs injury report. Patrick Mahomes not related. Their left tackle, Eric Fisher, who had the core muscle injury and had surgery, he actually practiced yesterday. Now, I don't know if that means he's going to play this Sunday, but it means he should be back soon.
So let me ask it a different way. You think the reins are coming off? That when they put if Patrick Mahomes plays Sunday, he is vintage Patrick Mahomes, go out there and play the game the way you want to play it?
Absolutely. Now, I think that it is Andy Reid's job to, especially early in the game, put him in fewer positions where he's likely to have to run around, where he's likely to have to escape pressure. That means quicker throws.
Yes.
That means more things that will protect him by play design. But once the game gets going, if he does see a pass rusher, he's running. If he sees the opportunity to roll out of the pocket and make a big play to Tyreek Hill down the field, he's doing it. And I actually think you might see a better version of him than you were seeing the few weeks before the knee injury, because the ankle is had limited his mobility more than the knee issue will. The knee, he's moving fine. The worry about the knee is not if it'll limit him, it's if he'll re-injure it. Mm-hmm. The ankle was actually limiting his mobility. So no, I think that Patrick Mahomes is going to come out, and I think by the time the Chiefs hit the bye in a couple weeks, when we're talking about the league MVP discussion, one of the narratives will be, well, Mahomes only missed 2 games. Could he get himself back into it in the final third of the season? So, yeah, I don't think you're going to see a limited, lesser version of the best player in the NFL.
Yeah, Jenna, I think that Andy Reid has to unleash Pat Mahomes if he's going to let him play. You have to go out there and let him read and react the way that he's accustomed to. You can't tell an athlete to go out there and say, hey, make sure you're careful out there because you have
a dislocation. He's their franchise.
No, I understand that, Jenna, but that's why I think that they should handle this conservatively. Nick wants him to be out there. Nick wants him to play. I'm not on that train with him. I think that they can stay another week or two. I would prefer that he would come back after the bye week.
That'd be 2 more games.
That would be 2 more games. You have to also factor in they play in the Mexico City game against the Chargers, and that game is going to be on that field that they had problems with last year. So I have issues with Pat Mahomes going out there from the standpoint of looking how competitive this team has been with Matt Moore as your quarterback. So if they can continue to be competitive and that offense can perform the way that it has, I don't see any reason why Russ Pat Mahomes back. It's not just about this season for the Chiefs. It's about making sure that you don't do anything to jeopardize your quarterback's health, because he's going to be your guy under center for the next decade and a half. So I look at this and I say, dislocated knee. They said that the timeline was going to be 3 to 6 weeks. I would have erred on the side of the latter time as opposed to the 3 weeks, which is now the first opportunity going up against this Titans team this weekend.
I think he could have played last week, and they held him out. So I think they feel they are erring on the side of caution now. I think the 3 to 6 weeks were before you saw the MRI where there was no ligament damage whatsoever, and before there was the report that his knee is somehow oddly double jointed in a way, that's not the real medical term, but it's the one I think people understand, to where he'd suffered the least possible damage from this scary looking injury at the time. As far as changing the offense because you might have a compromised quarterback, I mean, the Chiefs built their offense with this guy in mind. They got a track team out there. They don't have a whole bunch of what the Green Bay Packers have, 6'5" guys that you could run intermediate to a degree. They have Tyreek Hill. They drafted a Tyreek Hill replacement in McCole Hardman when they didn't know if he was going to be there. Sammy Watkins can do the intermediate stuff, but he's a 4-4 guy. The only guy that is really excels at the intermediate stuff is Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football. I do expect him to have a bigger role this week. But the other element for the Chiefs is they're coming off one of their most impressive defensive games in a couple years. And being able to build on that on the road, by the way, where they're undefeated this year, all of that, I think, spells very well for Kansas City against Tennessee.
And to your point, Patrick Mahomes did say that if that Packer game was a playoff game, he would have actually played in it.
And the Packer game was 2 games ago.
Exactly.
And then the Viking game was last week.
That sounds good, but sometimes as an organization, you have to protect the player from himself.
Absolutely.
Because players want to play. Well, outside of Kawhi.
There you go, Candy.
Yeah, Candy's on Nick's corner.
By the way, Chiefs don't lose again until next season. Mark it down.
Minnesota at Dallas for Sunday Night Football. Kirk Cousins facing the Cowboys for the first time since joining the Vikings. Dak has owned Cousins in their head-to-head matchups, going 4-0 against him, but questions still swirl around both of these quarterbacks. So, Nick, who do you trust more, Kirk Cousins or Dak Prescott?
Earlier in the show, you asked Rodgers or McCaffrey. I don't know, it was for MVP or something. And I said that's a bit of a Beyonce-Rihanna situation.
Well, what is this one?
This is an equally difficult question, but not for the great reasons of the Beyonce-Rihanna situation. And I would give an analogy for what it is, but I think it would be uncouth. I trust.
You can't leave us on there, Nick.
I'm not going to.
It's better off left alone, Jenna.
It'd be in poor taste. I trust Dak more, but barely. And I trust Dak more mostly because I think he's still, in fact, I know he still has room to grow. That Kirk Cousins is who he is, which is, he's fine. He's your quarterback, except for when you get to the biggest moments possible, and that is the edge Dak has significantly. You're fine with Kirk Cousins. And with Dak, you're fine with Dak as your quarterback. Where Dak has a significant edge in addition to age, where he's not yet a fully formed product, is, to Dak's credit, and I've been called a Dak critic, he does not shrink in the biggest moments.
Not
in fact,
rattled.
I would argue he tends to actually get a little bit better in the biggest moments, be it the biggest games or tight, late comeback opportunities, fourth quarter. You don't see his numbers drop off a cliff. Kirk Cousins, the bugaboo for him, the reason I think Washington never wanted to believe in him and give him a long-term deal, and the issue with him since he's been in Minnesota has been he's really good in your least important games, and he's really bad in your most important games. So for all those reasons, even though Kirk's numbers this year are really outstanding, and if he had a name that wasn't Kirk Cousins and you just saw the numbers, you'd say, wait, is he in the MVP discussion? I don't trust Kirk in that regard the way I trust Dak, even though I don't really trust Dak all that much.
Yeah, I don't trust Dak either. I mean, the answer to the question is I don't trust either quarterback. Now, I will say this. Dak Prescott has had the benefit of having Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield his entire career. I don't think we can say the same thing for Kirk Cousins. This is the first time he's got a game-changing running back with him in Dalvin Cook. And look at this team. They're 6-3. Now, they didn't get off to the best of starts, but I think we're seeing a better version of Kirk Cousins because you have that dynamic runner in the backfield to go along with one of the best receiver tandems in the NFL. But when it comes to big game situations, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. Dak Prescott is better in big games, primetime games, as opposed to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has a 9-23 record in late window games as opposed to Dak Prescott, who's 15-6. So who do I trust on Sunday night? Probably going to trust Dak Prescott because the record in the history tells me I should. Confidence comes from demonstrated performance. Dak has proven in big games in the regular season he can get the job done.
But for both of you, it's not a clear-cut answer. It's not an easy answer. One obviously is a lot younger and has a little more uptick, but they both seem to have a ceiling. And I think that's where you get yourself into trouble if you're going to pick which one.
Yeah, I think one is still an ascending player and one is probably static. Dak Prescott still has room to grow, and I know that because this is just his fourth year in the league. He hasn't seen enough football to say that he's capped out. Whereas Kirk Cousins, when you look at where he's at in his career, you would think that, okay, this is pretty much who he's going to be. Now, I think who you would prefer moving forward becomes a matter of how much is it going to cost me. With Dak Prescott, you know that what he's asking for is north of what Carson Wentz and Jared Goff got, which is around $33, $34 million on average annual value. With Kirk Cousins, he's locked in for this year and the next year at 28. Now, if it becomes a matter of which one would I prefer? I would probably prefer the one that's cheaper because I know I could surround that guy with the requisite talent to compete at the highest levels. But yeah, Jenna, this is not an easy question to answer. I will say this, Dak Prescott does have a playoff win on his resume. Kirk Cousins does not. So that becomes a differentiating factor when you're talking about a team with championship aspirations.
And Dak's got a playoff win, and he's been to the second round of the playoffs another time because of what he accomplished in the regular season, getting his team that bye his rookie year, something Kirk Cousins has not done. But Colin said this on his show earlier in the week, which is absolutely right. When you're ranking quarterbacks, no matter who the rank is doing the ranking, no matter the vast majority, once you get outside of the top 10 and you're in that 11 through 15 range, these two guys, their names are going to be very close to each other. You're going to have these two guys. And the similarity between the Cowboys, the Vikings, I would say the Niners, the Raiders, who we just talked about, what do they all have in common? Really good football teams that we have questions about their quarterback. Quarterback is, none of those quarterbacks are going to kill you. Are any of those quarterbacks good enough in a big spot to go up against the other teams you're going to have to play, all of whom have star quarterbacks? That's the question that we have with both of these teams. I lean Dak for the same reasons Canty does. Big spots, and he still has room to improve. We know who Kirk Cousins is, and that's been, he's a good quarterback, and at $28 million, it seemed like that was an overpay. Now all of a sudden, 2 years later, it's like, man, $28 million. If Dak's going to get 38, it does feel like a bargain.
Thank you for listening to the First Things First podcast. Remember, leave us a review and tell us what you think. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and catch us on FS1 Monday through Friday, 6:30 a.m. Eastern. For Chris Carter and Nick Wright, I'm Jenna Wolfe. So long, everybody.